Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are on a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grilling JR with the voice of wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross. Jim, how are you, man?
I'm good, Conrad. I'm back in Oklahoma. Just got back from Illinois. No, I just got back. That's a Creedence song. I just got back from Jersey, and a lot of fun. Hell of a house. We're sure on a roll right now, AEW. And then Nebraska comes to Norman this Saturday. I'll be there for that game at 11 a.m. Central, the brunch game. And I'm back on the road to Arthur Ashe in a few days.
Ooh, what a fun show that's going to be. A lot of people have had that one circled for a long time. Wednesday, September 22nd, AEW makes their New York debut, and in perhaps one of the most famous stadiums in the whole world. But I think it's a first for pro wrestling, and I'm pumped to see it, man. Arthur Ashe Stadium. So
I checked out the U.S. Open, Conrad, a little bit, just previewing.
Sure.
But boy, the look of this stadium and how it's going to look with our fans there is going to be really extraordinary. I think it's got a great look. I don't think wrestling's ever played there before. That's the AEW can thank Raphael Morphy for that one. So he had to jump through a lot of hoops to get that done politically, and so it should be an awesome look for us. I think they're selling limited view seats at AEWTIX.com, I believe, but it's going to look fantastic for all of us. So, and nobody can say that help. It helps. It's the difference in night and day. So the fans back is it's a huge deal. So I'm looking forward to it. I know the talents are looking forward to it. And that talent roster that Tony Khan's put together just continues to get deeper and deeper, and with quality depth, with starters. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, Connie? Huh? You know what I'm saying? God dang. I sound like a millennial. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, it's good. Things are good. A good week. Barbecue, JR's BBQ business is good, consistent. It's always grilling season, Conrad. You and I know that.
Oh, yeah.
You and I know that, but we're trying to teach the world that it's always grilling season. So,
and today we're doing something kind of special. We're paying tribute to one of your longest, closest personal friends, Mr. Gerald Brisco. How about that? He's going to turn the big 7-5 this Sunday.
Is he really?
Yes, he is.
Wow. Well, he's a hell of a guy. That's all I can say. He's probably, I don't have a friend inside wrestling better than Jerry Brisco. He's always been, he's loyal, hardworking. I've always said, I get a lot of credit for the Attitude Era talent roster because I was in charge of it, and putting it together, so forth, so on. But Gerald Brisco has never gotten the credit that he deserves for his recruiting. We would not have signed, for example, Brock Lesnar if it had not been for Gerald Brisco. And there's the backstory that's kind of interesting because, Brock is a University of Minnesota guy, and the head wrestling coach at Minnesota at that time was Jay Robinson. And that Jay Robinson is a key component to this story because he recruited Brock, he signed Brock, he coached Brock. And when and Jerry and Jay Robinson were teammates on the Oklahoma State wrestling team back in the day, if you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying.
And so that was our end. And so we go start recruiting Brock, and Brock is wanting to go make money right away. He was motivated by the cash. He was not a big pro wrestling fan, but he was motivated by the potential to make a lot of money. And so we made a deal with Jay Robinson that we would not recruit him and offer him a job until Brock finished his senior year. And to be quite frank about it, it wasn't really because of the academics. It was because the thought was that Brock would win the national championship the next year at heavyweight in Division I. And so we made a deal that we would not, tempt Brock. And so we kept our end of the deal. Jerry stayed in contact with Jay Robinson. And so at the end of the day, when he, meaning Brock, pronoun boy, my boy, uses the pronouns. He beat him. Who's he and who's him? So we signed him up and took him to Louisville. And I remember so many stories about Brock, and we introduced him to Vince at a house show or a TV in Minneapolis. And Vince had never met him. He didn't know anything about him. Vince didn't follow amateur wrestling. So when Vince saw him, he made a U-turn. He was on his way to the ring or something. He made a U-turn, and it was like and he saw what I saw. He saw what we all saw. He saw what you saw. Anybody that saw it, the guys said, God dang, he's something special. He makes you look.
Mm-hmm.
And Vince loved that concept of where if you're walking through an airport, you want a talent that will turn heads.
Right.
And Lesnar turned heads. And he was a badass. And he was a great athlete. So we sent in Brock to Louisville. And Jerry babysat that deal too. But certainly the guys at Louisville, Cornette, Danny Davis, and all those dudes down there, Rip Rogers, they took good care of Brock. And we gave him a promotion early on. Brock became the foreman of the ring truck. So Brock drove the ring truck, and all the boys under contract and talents were the ring crew. So he was a big alpha male from the get-go. And so Jerry was invaluable to that situation. And I'm not so sure, Conrad, that through that Minnesota tie-in, that didn't help get, what's that kid's name? The WWE just signed.
Yeah, Gable Stevenson.
Yeah, that's it. Who won the gold medal in the Olympics at heavyweight. So Jerry's reach goes far and wide, and we ended up signing. We did everything we could to make Brock comfortable. We signed his best friend, Shelton Benjamin, who was not a gift. Shelton Benjamin, of all those guys, that one class that we had that included Brock and Randy Orton and Cena, John Cena, of course, Dave Batista. We had a good class. That was a good get. Some good gets right there. And so Sheldon was on site to make sure that the big alpha male didn't go off the ranch. And because he was a social guy. So, but Jerry's just incredible. And he started there. He had a great career as a wrestler. So we'll talk all about that. But the fans need to know that Jerry Brisco was invaluable to the formation of the WWE talent roster. And Brock wasn't the only guy he signed. I mean, the great thing about Jerry was that he had a connection through Jay Robinson, and Jay Robinson opened the door for Jerry to get him in front of all these college coaches. Some of the old time college coaches still had a hard on for wrestling. They weren't, I don't get that. Oh, that's phony. It's fake. No. Well, the money's not fake.
Right.
And I think that was the motivation for Brock. So, but Jerry got in front of all these coaches, and over time has built a network of contacts. He's got a powerful Rolodex, shall we say. And a lot of guys that Jerry signed still are working in WWE now. Some of the guys that came in after I left. So Jerry's done a great job. I think it was forced out. I may be using the wrong terminology too early. You can't replace those personal relationships, Conrad. You know that, being in sales.
Sure.
That's you're looking for that. So in any event, I'm looking forward to the show. It's talking about one of my fellow Oklahomans, and boy, when I got that job, he was always there to give me advice, listen, and counsel me, all those things. So he's just a hell of a good guy, and he's a Hall of Famer along with his brother, the great Jack Briscoe. And I'm really glad that we're talking about him.
I get it. It's a wrestling podcast, but he's saving us money on our mortgage. You really trust this process? The reviews don't lie. 5-star review after 5-star review. We make it fast, we make it easy, and it's no cost or obligation. Give us a shot to earn your business. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did, especially if you like keeping more of your own money. You don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket, so what are you waiting for? Hurry to savewithconrad.com. Yeah, and his big birthday is this Sunday, the 19th. He was born September 19th, 1946. So shoot him a happy birthday message on Twitter. It's at FG Brisco. That's at FG Brisco. Born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, as Floyd Gerald Brisco, which explains the FG Brisco on Twitter. He had 5 siblings, including his future tag team partner and NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Mr. Jack Briscoe. When were the Briscoes on your radar? Probably before you were even in the game, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, before I ever thought about getting into pro wrestling. The thing about Oklahoma as a state, you know, football is the number one jam here in Oklahoma. It has been for a zillion years, seemingly. But a close second was amateur wrestling in that era. Oklahoma State and OU both had great wrestling teams. And so the newspapers, therefore, covered it. We didn't have social media, but we had daily papers. And the daily papers had writers assigned to both schools, and they kept up really well with the with the maneuverings of the team and all that stuff. So they became a part of my reading material. And the one that was jumped out first, of course, was Jack, because Jack was national champion his junior year of college, and still considered one of the greatest of all time. And one of my great thrills in wrestling, quite frankly, was meet Jack Brisco. And then Jerry and I just kind of put together an interesting story of that one, how I met Jerry. I went to Augusta, Georgia to meet Vince after, I was transitioning out of WCW and was looking for something to do. And I contacted Bruce, and Bruce set up a meeting for me and Vince in Augusta. They were doing TV there. They always do those 3 shows, like a superstar taping or a challenge taping. I think this was a challenge taping because I'm pretty sure it was, because Vince spent the entire evening talking to me outside the arena. I don't know if it was supposed to be a secret deal or what, but when I got there and I parked in the back like I always would if I was working, the first guy to meet me was Jerry Brisco. And he said, "You must be Jim Ross." And I said, I am. He's grinning. He knew who I was. I knew who he was. He said, I know you're here to see Vince, right? I said, yeah. I said, well, look, say what you got to say quickly, because he ain't going to be able to spend much time with you.
Right.
Okay. So cut to the chase. Let's go for the close early. But ironically, Vince met with me for like 3 hours. He didn't even want us to tape him. And Jerry said, "You must have made a hell of an impression, because he's never done that before. And I've been here for buku years." So Jerry was my facilitator to get in front of Vince, he and Bruce. And that's when our relationship started. I remember him saying, "Well, it'd be good to I hope you get something done, because it would be good to have another Okie in the house," type deal. Just old brotherhood, country guys. And so that's kind of how that started there. But I was aware of the Briscoes, especially Jack, from way early, before I ever thought about getting into wrestling in '74.
Let's let's keep it moving here and talk about how Gerald would wind up going to Oklahoma State, just like Jack did. And there's an old story that Jack had committed to OU.
Mhm.
And at the last second, Jack switched to OSU after the wrestling coach said he would help him get a national championship. And for some of our listeners, maybe abroad or maybe people who aren't totally dialed in to college football, explain how big the OU OSU rivalry is.
Well, for some of the Alabamans that are listening, it's Auburn and Alabama. It's Army and Navy. It's a great rivalry. Whatever your favorite rivalry is, Iowa State and Michigan. There's a zillion great rivalries. And OU and OSU is called Bedlam. When they meet in basketball or football or wrestling or whatever it is, it's called Bedlam. And OU is really good in football. And Jack was a hell of a football player. So and it was OU was kind of the glamorous school. OSU was more of an agricultural thing, and nothing wrong with that, by the way. And so the deal is, as I understand it, Oklahoma State kind of did a little end run there. They made sure that, you know, Jack was and Jerry raised by a single mom most of their life, and so and she had to work, take care of all those kids. So ironically, Mrs. Briscoe, found a job in Stillwater, wink, wink, and a house, double wink.
Got it.
So the Briscoes moved from Blackwell, Oklahoma to Stillwater, so Mama Briscoe could have a job and
A house.
in a house, and she could see her boy go to college. And then Jack went to Stillwater High School and was outstanding, or excuse me, Jerry went to Stillwater High School and was an outstanding wrestler. So he'd be recruited as well. So nonetheless, they had a good arrangement. So that's why they ended up in Stillwater. And that's why to this very day, Jerry is a devout Oklahoma State fan. And that doesn't affect our friendship. We laugh about it, we kid about it. But that's kind of how they ended up in Stillwater. That's how good Jack Briscoe was. It was almost a lock, Conrad. You can't say this about too many guys. It's almost a lock that Jack was the very best at his weight in America. And so a national championship was very attainable. And that's what these coaches are looking for, guys that can be. It's like I used to say about recruiting wrestlers. Can you headline WrestleMania someday? That was my goal. You could always fall lower and you're still going to be a good talent and make money. But if you can headline, if you're good enough to headline WrestleMania, then I did my job. So that's kind of the story there. Jack went on to wrestle Oklahoma State. And after he won the national championship his junior year, Jerry was just still in high school. And Jack decided to not come back for his senior year, because there's no doubt in anybody's mind that unless he was injured or something, he was going to win another national championship. However, Jack got married and had obligations and responsibilities. And so he left school after his junior year. Jerry stayed in Stillwater. Jerry wrestled for the Oklahoma State Cowboys when they were a powerhouse. They were really a powerhouse. And Jack went on to get in. Leroy McGurk, same guy that broke me in, broke Jack Briscoe in, and Bill Watts and Danny Hodge. And so I was in that very rarefied air group. And of course, then Jerry was broken in by Leroy, as I mentioned. So that started Jerry. So we got so many things in common. You know, our home base was always, we used to love talking about Oklahoma food, and who had the best chicken fried steak and stuff like that. So that's kind of where we were there, that Conrad. It was a really interesting backstory of the Briscoes. And I just love the fact they both went in the Hall of Fame together. I thought that was very apropos. So it was, Jerry and Jack both have been very, very special. You know, Jack Briscoe was, to me, there are a lot of great junior heavyweight champions, you know, the Funks and Flair, Harley, but none were better than Jerry Briscoe.
Right.
He had a different kind of game. He was more business-like. He had charisma, but he loved to wrestle. And so he was more of a wrestler than a showman. And if it came down to the nitty gritty and you're in some territory, some dude thinks he's going to become the NWA champion, you better have a real hellacious game plan, because he's going to beat the shit out of you. He's not losing the title unless he wants to lose it. So anyway, that's where we are with that. I'm wandering here because there's just so much coming through my mind now about how we met and who they were and all that stuff. But Jerry was my number one confidant when I was at 26 years at WWE. Never broke his word to me once. That's very unusual in wrestling. His commitments were gold. And then when we got together and he started recruiting. I proved all of his expenses. I owned him on the road. So he was willing to go to all these tournaments, the NAIA tournaments, Division II tournaments. He was a fixture at the NCAA a national championship tournament, and he would schmooze with all the coaches, and they loved him. He was personable, great stories, and he was one of them. He's one of them, Conrad. So if one of our own and the brother of Jack Brisco made it successfully and did well in pro wrestling, well, maybe it's not so bad after all. And I think that's what Jerry was able to open up. He opened the door for WWE to have an opportunity to recruit a lot of these talented amateur wrestlers who either are going to be a driver's ed teacher or a coach. That's overstating it, but you know what I mean. They weren't like number one draft picks. They didn't have a pro day.
Right.
So anyway, that's kind of where we were there in the early beginnings of this thing. And I just can't say enough good things about the Brisco family, and especially Jerry.
Well, as you said, once you're a professional at amateur wrestling, if that makes any sense, there's not a lot of job opportunity. So Jack sees the opportunity in professional wrestling. He gets recruited on that side of things. And eventually Gerald winds up tagging along with Jack to a show on spring break in 1968. And unbelievably, the promoter asked Jerry to substitute and be Jack's tag partner. And he did. Now he has almost no experience at all. Of course, he had seen Jack do a thing or two, but it's not like he's had any formal training at this point. And he finds himself becoming a professional wrestler here. He has some health issues, winds up dropping out of college, and goes full time into professional wrestling. And man, Jack trains Jerry and they're off to the races. When do you remember seeing them for the first time, either as singles or in a tag situation?
On TV, back in about, I don't know, 60, in the late 60s, early 70s. They're I don't want to say fixtures, but pretty much they were regulars on the TV show. And, they were, for a kid in Oklahoma, to see two Okies doing well in the sport that I happen to love, the business I happen to love, was very motivational. It made me stay hooked. So anyway, I'd say late 60s, early 70s, and they were generally always in a tag. But you could tell that, as good as Jerry was, he had a challenge to step out of the shadow of his future NWA champion brother, Jack. But they were a hell of a team. I mean, they were like, they did things together that made you think they prepared. They had a game plan, all those things that you fantasize about. So they were a popular team. Again, you think about it from a regional standpoint. This is before the internet. This is before all those things. This was a local television show in that territory. And in that region, in that territory, whether it be Springfield or Oklahoma City or Tulsa, Little Rock, whatever it may be, they were familiar names. And they did a good job. They, meaning McGurk's Championship Wrestling, did a good job of getting them over. Because here's what you got. Think about this. When Jack started wrestling with his brother, it's a great rub for Jerry, no doubt. But you got a national champion on your TV. It's like when we signed Kurt Angle or when we signed Brock Lesnar. They were the number one at their weight in the world. And certainly Kurt went on to win the gold medal, I think it was 76 or no, I'm not 76. I can't remember the year. But we signed Kurt but that was a great calling card. He's former national champion, Olympic champion and national champion. So that was a big deal. And the sports guys who didn't like pro wrestling would embrace coverage of the pro wrestling matches whenever Jack or Hodge were on the card, and they were on a lot of them. So I remember refereeing what we should talk about later, I guess, but I remember refereeing a Hodge versus Briscoe NWA title match. When Jack would come in, he'd be over there a week, and so I had some of those bookings. And I remember one, it was in Little Rock, and the next night in Fort Smith, Arkansas, where they were fighting each other, and that was one of the biggest thrills of my life. Just they went Broadway, which I had to understand. The first time I did a Broadway was Race and Funk, Terry or Dory Jr. and Harley, and I didn't even know what Broadway meant. I thought it was a street in New York City. Had some special rules. Oh, they're going Broadway. Oh, what's that mean? So I asked this guy on the way to the ring, one of my teachers, the great Leo Voss. Leo, what the hell's Broadway mean? You know, hey, what is it? He told me it's a draw, kid. It's a draw. He said, but you don't know that. So when their shoulders are down, you count just like it's over, and count the same cadence every single time. It's a draw. I said, so they're going to wrestle each other for an hour? Yep. So that was my first Broadway. It was only for the NWA title. So they had high hopes for me as a referee, bigger hopes than I did, because I knew sure as hell I didn't want to do that for a living for the rest of my life. But it's a way to get my foot in the door. I got my room in the castle by starting out as a referee and a ring crew and all those things. So Jerry got that good rep from his brother, and Jerry was very talented. I mean, Jerry was a hell of a wrestler. Jerry had a lot of fire. So, but we'll talk about that. But nonetheless, it's funny how everybody found their way into McGurk's office in his territory, and Leroy had a special place in his heart for us Hokies, because McGurk was from Tulsa. And he was former national champion at guess where? Oklahoma State. So it was quite the intertwining and intermingling of contacts and so forth that got us all together through that same conduit. What they call the transfer portal.
That's right.
Yeah, I think we were all in the same portal, so it was cool.
Hey, so the Briscoes are part Native American, but they were never booked the way you would see a Wahoo McDaniel or a Chief J Strongbow or a Tatanka. Why do you think that is? It feels like in that era of wrestling, especially, the promoters would have just jumped all over that.
That was the Briscoes' choice.
Good.
Yeah, they didn't want to stereotype their Native American heritage with a Native American headdress and all the typical Native American attire. They were proud Native Americans. I went to when they were inducted into their Hall of Fame there here in Oklahoma. I'm trying to think what tribe they're in. I'm a Cherokee, and they're,
Choctaw, maybe?
Chickasaw.
Chickasaw, there you go.
Yeah, Chickasaw. And they're honored members of the Chickasaw Nation. And there's plaques and things like that down in here in Oklahoma. I think it's the Ada. I know I drove down for their induction. It was kind of cool. All the family was there. And that was a big deal to be recognized by your tribe, your people. And so that was the deal. They have great pride in their heritage, but they didn't want to exploit it. They wanted to, all the announcers, Gordon Sully and everybody, they would say, these guys are Native Americans. And I think they're like 3/4. I don't know if they're full blood. They might be. I never did ask Jerry that, but I knew he was proud of his heritage, and that was their choice, not to be stereotyped like Wahoo, for example.
Well, we know Jack is going to become one of the biggest stars in wrestling, including becoming the NWA World Champion. But as far as his brother Jerry goes, boy, they had some legendary feuds with the Funk Brothers. Explain to our listeners who might not know anything about the Briscoes and the Funks. I mean, at the end of the day, this is like a college football rivalry almost. It's Texas versus Oklahoma, right?
Without a doubt. And that Texas-Oklahoma rivalry was real. When they would go to wrestle young period of time, when they were young, I'm trying to say, they go stay to the Amarillo territory. And Jerry will still tongue in cheek he would say, well, and every time we went to Amarillo, the old man Funk would beat our ass. But that was part of the charm, because before they're all champions and the Funks came to work for McGurk, which is not that often, they did the honors. So that rivalry between Oklahoma and Texas was real. It's more than just a football rivalry, the second Saturday in October in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. More than that. And that's how we all grew up. And so they took a lot of pride in that. And of course, then the old story of, where Dory got hurt allegedly in a pickup truck accident. I think we're going to talk about that. And he was supposed to drop the title to Jack in Houston. And that didn't come off because Dory was unable to perform because of the accident. And then if you listen to the Briscoe side of the story, they think that accident was not as serious as it was made to be.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because the old man Funk did not want one of his sons to lose the NWA title in Texas to an Okie. That may sound really stupid to the fans listening right now. Oh, that can't be. Look, that's how it was.
Right.
So that was the story there. And they had that great rivalry that they parlayed into money for decades. The Funk Briscoe rivalry was huge. It sold tickets everywhere, every territory they went, whether it was in Atlanta or Florida or the Carolinas, wherever it was. They made the promoters money, and then consequently they made money out of it as well. So that OU Texas thing was real in the world of the Funks and the Briscoes.
I want to mention 1973, Jack, Gerald, and one of the non-wrestling brothers, Bill, opens up the Brisco Brothers Body Shop, which, of course, if you were watching in the Attitude Era, you remember. Did you ever do any business with the old body shop? And how common was it back in the 70s for wrestlers to start to plan maybe an out of the ring business to count on once their in-ring days were over?
It wasn't as common as it should have been, Connie, because a lot of guys thought they were making good money and that money will never end.
Right.
And that's the case today with a lot of guys. You ask some of these young kids, hey, what do you want to do as your career moves forward? And they say, well, I don't know. This is all I've ever wanted to do. So you become very one-dimensional. And what I always realized when I signed somebody, if their only goal was to be a wrestling star, and that was it. That was all. That was their whole hand. They're going all in, first hand, all in. Then I would keep an eye on that scenario, because then all of a sudden, when you don't make it to the main event level, or you're not making the money that you perceive that you should be making, or you want to make, or need to make, you would, you start making mistakes. You start taking shortcuts, and I think that's kind of what the Briscoes wanted to avoid. They were smart, street smart guys, and Bill, the older brother, Bill Briscoe, really nice man. He had a background in that world, and Jack and Jerry had the great name identity, the Briscoes, in Florida, because Eddie Graham loved them. And Eddie Graham was the owner of Florida Championship Wrestling and the booker. And he loved the Briscoes, and for all the right reasons. They were loyal, they were dependable, and they were great talents. And they were a great babyface team. And then subsequently they became a great heel team. So, but they were really, they were ahead of their time. Let's put it that way. They were ahead of their time in securing a business that they could rely on when their bumping and wrestling days were concluded. So they were one of the first to do that. But they had a very successful business there. The body shop was right across the street from the football stadium. So it was easy to find, easy to locate. They did great work. I visited the body shop on many occasions. I didn't have any work done there because I never lived in Florida to have my vehicle there. But if I had needed work, you could bet your ass that they would have been the guys I would have been doing business with. So they had a very successful business. And here's the other thing about that. They bought a lot of land in that neighborhood. Real estate is king.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So they bought a lot of property in that area They just kept gaining in value, location. They're across the street from the Buccaneer Stadium. So if nothing else, people would park there for money and walk across the street, go to the ball game. So they were making money coming and going, parking, and certainly the body shop. But they were ahead of their time in that regard by far.
In 73, we mentioned they open up the body shop, but the next major milestone that happens in the Briscoe family is once Jack drops the NWA world title to Harley Race, he sort of opts out of wrestling. It's a famous story about Jack just being wore down by the schedule of the traveling NWA world champion. And I think as the story goes, he went on a bridge in Tampa, took his watch off and just threw it in the ocean. The idea being, I don't need this anymore. Cause he was used to just waking up in a new town every day and having to ask, hey, where am I again?
Yeah.
His quality of life was not quite the same as the NWA world champion. Of course, these days it's different, but it's a fairly legendary story. What were you hearing about that when Jack dropped the belt and it felt like, I'm going to take a break for a bit?
Well, Jack was booked heavy. Everybody wanted Jack Briscoe on their cards, these promoters around the country, around the world. I know that he was a godlike in Japan, and the Japanese guys loved him because he could wrestle. He could wrestle with anybody, any style. But he was booked unmercifully. He was rarely off, and of course we know that our great business has no off season. So they played that up to the hilt. Jack was always working. And so he missed family time. He went through, that created a negative environment. He got divorced, the normal stuff that you hear from a lot of wrestlers, on the road so much, it affected their relationship and their marriage and their being a parent and all these things. So he just got burned out, man, burnt to the crisp. And he needed this time off when he dropped the belt to Harley. and there was no issue with Jack dropping the belt to Harley Race because of the great respect they had for each other. And Harley loved Jack and working with him. Jack learned a lot from Harley. So it was a fait accompli. He needed a break. And I think that's throwing the watch off the bridge was a symbol of, I don't need to know what time it is. I don't need to know what day it is. I'm home. I'm in Florida. I'm enjoying the weather. We got a thriving business in our body shop, and I could always go back and wrestle, or as the Briscoes would say, wrestle. Always go back and wrestle anytime I wanted to. So I think that was just it. Basic burnout.
He had done 500 days as champion before a little 7-day run with Giant Baba, and then 366 more days as champion. And then he ultimately goes ahead and drops it to Terry Funk. But man, it is a pretty legendary type situation where, you've got this NWA touring champion that everybody wants and everybody wants to get a date on, but he has to sacrifice pretty much everything else going on in his life. And we don't really talk about this era very often, but I've always sort of made the analogy that the NWA at the time was almost like a miniature mafia of sorts. You had this NWA convention that would get together once a year and it was closed off, and you had the heads of all the territories, almost like they would say the heads of the 5 families, and they would discuss all their business together, including who was going to be the champion. Right. Did you have that feeling as a youngster, when you're growing up in the wrestling business that, hey man, this is sounding awfully familiar?
Yeah, it was a unique community, to say the least. The promoters would make and the owners would make the decision as to who the champion is going to be. And there was always several candidates. Bill Watts was even a candidate at one time. He ran from it because he had his own territory. He was making money and he was being able to dictate and control the schedule. Ted DiBiase was a highly thought of option. I know he was up for it one time. Dick Murdoch was a strong candidate for the NWA title, but the promoters that knew him knew that Dickie was Dickie. He could be Shemp of the Three Stooges. He'd do all the funny stuff. And a lot of the old guys didn't like that. But as far as working and being 6'5" and 270 and being able to be a baby face or a heel, being able to cut promos, Murdoch was right in the hunt for that stuff. But his own in-ring style worried the decision makers. So they'd go to that convention in Vegas and it'd be decadent, great food and a lot of booze, and the wives were there. And I've seen pictures. I'd never gone. That was before my time. I had not earned that right to go to the Alliance meeting. Now, Leader McGurk and his wife went every year. That was a big deal. So, and they got to see everybody's kind of reunion-like deal. Then they did their business. So, and then took their votes and all those things. So, you're right on the head about the nonviolent mafia aspect.
Yeah.
Of the NWA, and it was everybody had their little. It's like going to a political convention, quite frankly, and you'd have people touting this candidate and so forth and so on, until they came up with when they did their vote, and there you went. So, but it was a big deal, that NWA thing, and they love Jack. Here's Jack's biggest supporter probably was Eddie Graham. And Eddie Graham had a lot of influence, because Eddie was widely known as probably one of the smartest bookers of all time, and built that territory from scratch to one of the most desired territories to work in. He didn't have any state tax. He had great weather as a rule. All the trips, except maybe one or two, were by car. So it was a really cool place to work. And Eddie had a lot of. So when a guy had a top talent, here's how they would protect that. Let's say that Leroy McGurk had a top talent, and the talent had run their course and they kind of wanted to leave. Maybe the monies are soft or whatever, and they needed to be booked. So McGurk would call Eddie, and Eddie would book them. And then so now the talent goes from Oklahoma and our crazy ass weather, dodging tornadoes and things like that. So to go to Florida and live in the sunshine. Well, so long for the sunshine state of Georgia. Gordon Soley, loved him. So that's kind of how that works. So then, what does all this mean? It means that when that talent who left McGurk and went to Tampa, well, that's where the office was, when they were done with Tampa, Eddie would steer them back to McGurk. It's trading, getting good talent to stay or come or whatever. So that was kind of how that worked. So Eddie was a key figure in that, and Eddie was a big time player in the Alliance meetings and the convention.
It's always been fascinating to me just to hear about the politics of the NWA World Champion, and we'll talk about that another day. But what I do want to talk about is when Jack jumps back into wrestling, he's no longer interested in perhaps pursuing being the NWA World Champion. Sort of been there, done that. Now he wants to make some money and have some fun, and who better to do that with than his old pal, his old brother, Mr. Jerry Brisco. Jerry was the first man to hold the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title. He defeated Les Thornton for the NWA World Junior Heavyweight title, which of course is the belt that Danny Hodge helped make famous. And the story has been that the Briscoes helped discover Hulk Hogan playing bass in a Tampa nightclub and recommend him to Hiro Matsuda. I guess this is maybe one of Jerry's first and perhaps most famous recruiting jobs of all time, huh?
Yeah, I guess it would be, wouldn't it? That's a true story. Terry Bollea was a bass player in a band, but he had a great look, as we all know, and he was big and statuesque. And again, he did that. He fulfilled that qualification, checked the box that McMahon always likes. He's going to turn heads in the airport. And so, obviously, Hulk, now Hulk, but then whoever his name was going to be, he did that. So yeah, that was a hell of a get for Jerry. And I've seen Jerry and Hulk talk, and I've heard Hulk do interviews, and he gives the Briscoes a lot of credit for his start. And I don't know that Eddie Graham embraced Hulk at the beginning, because Hulk wasn't an amateur. Hulk wasn't a shooter, unlike Jack Brisco and Jerry. And hence I think that may have been the phone ringing from Hiro Matsuda when he broke Hulk's ankle. Let's see if this guy's tough. He's not an amateur. Let's see how tough he is. And so they broke his damned ankle. I think it was an ankle or leg or ankle. They broke something. He was gone. He was out. But here's the thing. To Hogan's credit, he came back.
That's right.
And when he came back, now he's turning heads. This kid really wants it. And so he had Jack and Jerry in his corner, among others. And of course, we know how that story ends with Hulk. Pretty good.
Yeah, it turned out okay. We were just sort of making the analogy that the NWA and the convention and all that almost felt mafioso, if that's the right word. But there's a famous story involving the Brisco brothers and Ernie Ladd. And if you've read The Observer, you probably know which story we're talking about. It's when Ernie Ladd holds a title in a Florida territory. He's asked to drop it. He agrees to do so under one condition. I don't want this match taped for television. While Ladd is wrestling, he notices a camera is filming the match, so he changes the finish and refuses to do a job. And later that night, he got a surprise visit from the Brisco brothers. Not leaving anything to chance, he went to the trunk of his car where he had hit a crowbar. Before they could make a move, the crowbar comes out. And this was not the intended result. Did you hear about this story?
Oh, yeah. Firsthand. Because I remember I worked with Ernie a lot. Ernie was Cowboys booker at Mid-South. And my domino playing buddy, he told me one time we playing dominoes like 3 a.m, the day of TV. He said, "Dan, don't tell the boss we're up this late, and certainly don't tell him he beat me." He didn't want to do jobs of dominoes either.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So Ernie was a good guy. Ernie told me the story. Ernie thought they were going to beat the hell out of it.
Right.
And because he had been unloyal, he had strayed from the family. And so consequently, there had to be a price to be paid for that. You need more respect. Well, little did they know, of course, they were drinking. So it was booze filled. I think if you found the Briscoes in a sober way, instead of hitting that fire water, and going to do their thing with Ernie, the outcome would have been different, because there's no way even Ernie Ladd could beat both of them if they were sober. It would not have happened. And I love Ernie. I love all those guys. But bottom line is that Ernie beat him to the punch. And with that, and hey, when you're 6'9" and 320, and your feet covers the ground he walks on, and you get on a telephone and call somebody, then that crowbar is a pretty damn good tag team partner. So that's how that ended. And I think Ernie took him to the hospital.
Well, as the story goes, he put both brothers in the trunk of his car and dropped them off at the hospital. And of course, there's another more perhaps sensationalized version of the story where he dumps them on Eddie Graham's front lawn. But
I didn't hear that one. I have heard it, but I don't think that has a lot of validity, Connie.
No, of course, that's the wrestling version.
It would have been a good movie scene.
Oh, for sure.
You know, that's what Tony Soprano would have done.
Well, the biggest thing that's happening to Jerry Briscoe's wrestling career is a move that's made outside the squared circle. The Briscoes turned heel against Steamboat and Youngblood, and they were drawing some amazing crowds. But in the process, the Briscoes become part owners of Georgia Championship Wrestling. They're wondering, was there still money to be made in this end of the business as they're watching Vince McMahon's expansion of the WWF? Georgia and Florida were frankly struggling as territories. Supposedly Jack goes to Jim Barnett at the time and lets him know that he's going to have to take advantage of their national platform on TBS and start expanding, which Barnett turns down. Barnett's alleged heavy spending wasn't helping matters within the organization, and a move was made to put Ole in charge of Georgia Championship Wrestling. Remember we were talking about how wrestling back then almost seemed mob-esque? Well, here it is again.
Yeah.
Ole gets the company right again, but of course it's making money and everyone's making money from the agreement, but the Briscoes don't think they're getting their fair share. And the rumors at the time were that the Briscoes were talking with folks about selling their points, possibly to Jim Crockett. the biggest part is that of this entire story is that Georgia has the only wrestling show on TBS. So what we know is going to become the Crockett time slot, if you will, was Georgia Championship Wrestling. This predates Crockett's run on TBS. Eventually, as we know, the Briscoes sit down with Vince McMahon and make a deal to sell him the territory with this TBS time slot for a reported $750,000. Carry me through this. What do you remember about, I think they called it Black Saturday.
Right. Well, all of us are wrestling fans. We're aware, Georgia Championship Wrestling was a big deal because, if you're a promoter, and you wanted to get a talent over, you'd call Barnett, my boy. Conrad, if you wanted to get booked, Barnett would have booked you. I love those chinks. My God. He looks like a lumberjack. I'll get him a big plaid shirt. Briscoes, basically, they had their points that they had in the company gave them that was all McMahon needed to have the majority vote, shall we say. And the Briscoes sold their share to Vince, and it caused an uproar. And of course, Jack and Jerry were kind of ostracized to some of the traditional NWA people like Ole. Didn't make any friends in that deal, but they made a lot of money. And they showed you they're businessmen. They didn't think they were getting their fair. They don't see they're from what I understand, they were leery of the first count. By that I mean, back in the old days, before computerized ticketing, when their tickets were sold, hard tickets, roll tickets, whatever you want to call it, the first person to get a count was the promoter. So what the promoter said was what it was. And Jack and Jerry disbelieved, and a lot of those guys were doing audits. Audits meaning they would have a plant in the house clicking attendance. And so you know pretty close how many people were there, and was that count off from what the promoter was giving you. And I think that was the case here. They thought they were being shorted, and they weren't getting their fair share because of the first count rule. And that was a bold move. That was a bold move. I remember Cowboy telling me all about that deal, because I think at one time he was a stockholder. I think he ended up selling his too, but not to Vince. I think he sold out before all that stuff started. But he was the booker there for a long time. Cowboy was. So that's kind of how it was. When people say it's not about the money, Connie, it's all about the money. And that was all about the money for the Briscoes. And it's a business. They had a chance to increase their own personal value and to get a big infusion of cash. And that's what they did.
As the rumor goes, it's like they felt perhaps Ole was being too cautious with the money, and that Barnett was maybe being too frivolous with the money. And there had often been people sort of freestyling that maybe Barnett had a quote unquote skim set up. Boy, this all sounds very mob-like. Did you ever hear anything about that?
Well, you just knew it happened.
Right.
It happened everywhere. It wasn't Georgia Championship Wrestling and Jim Barnett or Ole Anderson or whomever it may be you want to bring into the story. They weren't inventing anything new. So veteran wrestlers, the guys that are grown up in the territory era, like the Briscoes, they were well aware of all this scenario. So, and of course, at the same time, I don't know how it affected a relationship with Eddie Graham, but they had Eddie on their side more often than not, and that was a big bonus for them. So, but it was every territory that had roll tickets. You think that, I don't know that, I've talked to wrestlers that worked in virtually every territory since 1974, and they all said the same thing. The skim.
Yeah.
It's first count. That's as simple as that. You get 10,000 people. No, we only had 8. Well, there you go. So how are you going to prove they didn't have 8?
Right.
You have no proof, and you got a decent payday, but not as much as you would have gotten if they had given a true count. And I think the Briscoes just got full of that tired of that scenario. And then they had a chance to hit a big payday, their biggest payday ever with Vince, and they took it.
It's something that I've heard Jerry sort of joke about before. Wrestling fans refer to July 14th, 1984, where Vince McMahon walks out on screen on the World Championship Wrestling set, and he shakes hands with Freddie Miller, and they're essentially introducing the World Wrestling Federation, not Georgia Championship Wrestling that fans had grown up with and become accustomed to. Fans would refer to this as Black Saturday. I've heard Jerry refer to this as Green Saturday because this is the most money he had ever made in wrestling at that point.
Yeah, it was a business deal. And, you know, people are going to listen to this and say, well, Briscoes were unloyal. No, they're loyal to themselves and their family. You know, they both had children. They both had wives. They both had homes. They both had mortgages. And they were also smart enough, Conrad, to know that this gravy train of taking bumps and traveling and the physicality, the no all season scenario cannot last forever. It's just illogical to perceive that it can. And I think they made a very smart business deal that a lot of folks did not see coming, and it shocked the wrestling world, quite frankly, when it did occur.
They eventually dropped the belts to Wahoo, McDaniel, and Mark Youngblood, and are technically fired by Jim Crockett just a few weeks later. At this point in 84, you've been in the game for about 10 years. What were you hearing about all that was going on here with the Briscoes and Georgia and the Crockett's and what have you?
Well, just pretty much what you just outlined. You know, I wasn't on the inside enough, but Bill Watts was my big mentor, and he'd tell me a few things, but it was a lot of turmoil, unrest, and everybody wanted to, you know, here's the thing. If you're a promoter like Cowboy was in Oklahoma and Mid-South, so forth and so on, you know, you didn't want to, you want to be able to put your talent on that TBS Superstation show. Even if a guy went in and did a job, getting your talents on TBS was a big deal.
Oh yeah.
And here's the other thing. Getting their talent that was over off of TBS booked into the Mid-South territory for big shows was commonplace. You know, Dusty was on there a lot. He came to Mid-South a lot. Tommy Rich came in from time to time when he was hot. Anybody else was there. When Watts needed a big rugged heel to play against in Mid-South or the Superdome or wherever it may be, oftentimes he got that big heel from Georgia Championship Wrestling. And they had all the footage to go along with it, so you could put together video packages. So in your local TVs and people that didn't have cable, they were made aware of who these dudes were. Mass Superstar, Bill Eadie, a lot of guys like that. So I think that was the biggest regret of that deal going down, is that a lot of the promoters lost their opportunity to either book talent into or from TBS and Georgia Championship Wrestling. But to me, that's about all, as far as it went, you know. But nobody was, and McMahon was kind of the universal heel. You know, a lot of people, you know, were not pleased to do business with him for whatever reasons, and some were justified, I'm assuming, and some weren't. So it was unsettling, and you got a different story every day. What's going on? What's happening here? You know, Gordon Solie not being on that show was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I've always fought for the announcers to get their share of credit when it's due. And Solie was the voice of that brand and the voice of that network. And he got left out. He got completely pushed aside. And I thought that was a big mistake, because Vince wanted to have his people there, or him, to do the play-by-play so he could tell his stories his way.
Well, the Briscoes have made the move. You know, they're going to work for the World Wrestling Federation, and they're not easy for me to say. They're not there very long before a blizzard hits the Northeast. And as the legend goes, Jack turns to his brother and says, well, that's enough wrestling for me. I'm going home. Yeah. And he did. He never returned to professional wrestling. Of course, Jerry's going to transition into a front office position. He's going to be a road agent. He's going to do a lot more for the company, but essentially that's the end of their in-ring career. Did Jerry tell you this famous story about Jack in a blizzard saying, "Oh, I'm too old for this shit"?
Well, I mentioned earlier, I just got back from Newark, and that's kind of where I think that's where it happened.
Yeah.
In Newark, the Newark airport. He told Jerry, he said, well, I'm out of here. He said, what do you mean you're out of here? We're booked so and so and so and so, not me. I ain't going. I'm done. I'm going to Florida. And of course, it happened to be a very brisk, cold day in Newark. And it was nice weather down in Tampa. So Jack got on the first flight to Tampa, and they not to be seen again. So I don't agree with leaving your bookings, but again, Jack got caught up in the burnout factor, just like he was as the NWA champion, working all those days and all those crazy ass hard rings or bad rings, great opponents, not so good opponents. Just got tired of it. And he'd saved his money. And the fact that they had that body shop, they had a steady income coming in to help, supplement their mortgage, household expenses and so forth. But yeah, that was, Jerry said, I was shocked. He said, but I knew, and look at his eye, he meant it. He was done. But luckily, Vince was smart enough to not hold that against Jerry and use Jerry for his skills that he had gained over all those years. Jerry was a great administrator and a hell of a road agent. So he'd make the towns to everybody and set up the matches for the talents. And they usually had 2 agents at every city. And so that's what Jerry did. And did a hell of a job with it, quite frankly. He knew how to lay out a match because he had worked babyface, he'd worked heels, he had been in tags, he'd been in singles, and had a real good eye for talent and a feel for the game. And Vince couldn't replace that with anybody that he had at that point in time. Jerry was not lazy. And some of the agents during that period had found their comfort zones, Conrad, and, Strongbow, for example. Jay was a great guy, but, he's not going to work very hard if you didn't have to get by. And Jerry wanted to make everything better, and he was younger and aggressive and so forth. So it worked out well for everybody. Jack went home and was happy. Jack was happy until the day he died. And that's when I got to know him really well, when he's back out of wrestling. And anytime I go to Florida to do something with Jerry or whatever, we'd always have lunch with Jack. I got to tell you, from a fanboy's perspective,
that was awesome, I'm sure.
Oh my God, it was just great. And the stories were just phenomenal. And, my only regret, I said this one time about when I shared a suite with Muhammad Ali in New Orleans for Cowboy for 3 or 4 days. I think 3. I should have taken the conversations or taken notes or something, because we talked about, him betting on his own matches and fights rather, and all these things. And it was just amazing. And I didn't, and I regret that. The same thing with all those lunches with Jack. I should have had a little notes or a little recorder. Can I record this conversation? And or whatever. But I didn't have the foresight. But I missed the opportunity there, because those have been great books, quite frankly. So that was kind of how we did that. We got together every time I go to Florida. We'd have lunch. They had the places all picked out because that was their town. And you walk in, it's like walking in with Elvis. People loved him. And Jerry. They're big personalities. They've become, Eddie Grimm and made them massive stars in the state of Florida. Massive stars. And the fans never forgot and always embraced that popularity.
When you first met Jerry backstage at that WWF television taping, when you're looking for work in '93, do you know what Briscoe's official role was at the time?
Yeah, he was still an agent.
Okay.
He was still an agent, road agent, and, promoter, probably more in the promoter side then than he was the agent as far as working out matches. In other words, Jerry would do all the box office settlement, would interface with the manager of the arenas. And he was like a promoter. and not doing so much laying out matches as he was the promoter side. And that's kind of why he was available. You know, on that Augusta meeting, we were meeting at a standing for 2.5 or 3 hours, where the rampway, the loading dock would be. So you'd back all your stuff into down that little hill thing, and go in the back where they'd unload the ring. The talents would park in the back. They go in the stage door, so to speak. And Jerry would peek out the door every now and then because I could see the door. I guess just making sure that that the WCW guys hadn't set Vince up to get waylaid or something. I don't know. Get back to your mafia concept. Well, they exposed the boss out there by himself, this guy that we don't even know that well. We know what he does, we know who he is, but we don't know him. So Jerry would check in on that every now and then to make sure that Vince wasn't set up. And of course, there was no setup. It was just a meeting.
It's hilarious.
But anyway, it was a fun thing. But that's where that mafia thing comes in again. That overlying cloud of uncertainty and kind of a tough situation to be in, quite frankly. And I was so naive at the time. You know, I never thought one time. Jerry told me the story about him checking on us. That thought never even came to my mind, Conrad, because I didn't have those thoughts in my head. I was just looking for work. That's all. Simple. Job interview. And it ended up working out pretty good. 26 years later, I did all right.
Yeah, I would say so. You talked last week at the end of our 9/11 SmackDown episode that Jerry was a major part of the talent relations success that you had in the 90s. When you make that transition, what was it about Jerry that helped you, or you thought were his qualities that would, really shine in that department?
Well, he was honest and he was loyal. And I found out very early on that if I told him something in confidence, it stayed there. And as simplistic as that may sound to the folks listening today, watching our podcast, which we appreciate as always, it's a very rare occurrence in wrestling. The dirt, my God, the dirt. Jim Barnett walked in my office every day. Is there any dirt? I don't know. You know better than me. Well, I heard. Now, don't quote me. I heard some dirt on Dusty or somebody. Pick out a name. But Barnett loved that stuff. He'd get on the phone. That was before he may be talking to Dave Meltzer or something. I don't know. Could be. Cowboy did. And Paul Bosch did. So two very respected promoters confided in Meltzer, got his opinion or feedback or what do you think of this or what have you. But Barnett loved the dirt. He loved the gossip. But I couldn't trust him. If he's telling me all these secrets, then he's going to tell somebody else my secrets. So my secrets never existed. I never gave him anything. And I might talk to him about what he entered into the conversation. But Jerry was just a loyal. I've said many times, Connie, I talked about this. What's your number one trait recruiting all these guys? Well, they got to be reliable.
Right.
Show up for work, be in shape, be straight, be ready to roll. And straight meaning not on drugs or alcohol, come in clean and do your business. But Jerry was just so reliable and so trustworthy that simplistic as it sounds, there's got to be more to the story than that. There really wasn't. Loyal to a fault, honest. And I think that you talk to Bruce and Jerry were very close.
Oh yeah. Still are.
Still are. I talk to Jerry probably once every other week, just to see how this football season now, as you well know. And that's where that's the subject. That's a basic topic of what we're talking about is that. Of course, Jerry's doing a little podcast with JBL, and they're doing well. And they have an interesting concept and what they do. And I'm happy for both those guys. So Jerry and I are still in great communication. But if I told him something today that I need to remain confidential, it would stay confidential. There was a trust factor between JR and Jerry Brisco that is in place and strong to this very day. And I'm very honored to still be able to say that about a great friend.
I wanted to ask, you had a couple of trips in and out of the company. Were you in touch the entire time with Briscoe? Was he checking in with you no matter your status within the company, if that makes sense?
Yeah, he did. He never forgot me. He knew that he felt like a lot of guys there that I kind of dealt a dubious hand. Why is JR getting, leaving him and Monsoon? I'd get calls every week from Monsoon and from Jerry. Just ironically, they weren't attached. I was a conduit there. They're calling to talk to me to see how I was doing, because once you get in this business and you believe that you're a one-dimensional pro wrestling person and you lose the job with the biggest company in the world, things don't always look so bright. So, but Jerry called every week. What are you doing? What are you doing, kid? Hey, what are you doing, Okie? Then we'd talk football or what have you. Or you got any prospects? Well, I've got little things going here and there, nothing serious. And I'm sure that Jerry at some point would get back to Vince. Hey, what about JR? Is he done, Vince? Whatever the case may be. So I talked to him every week. He was such a strong, important person in the rebuilding of my relationship in WWF at the time, and kept me a little front of mind awareness of some of the head honchos, namely the BKM.
Let's talk about the stuff that he contributed in front of the camera that we would be most familiar with, where he maybe was the puppeteer behind the scenes. Steve Austin and Bret Hart had perhaps one of the best matches in WrestleMania history at WrestleMania 13. It ended with that famous double turn. Of course, Ken Shamrock was the special guest referee. And as the story goes, Gerald Brisco is a big part of helping putting that match together. A double turn is not exactly something very easy to pull off, but they did it as good as anybody ever did. What do you remember about Gerald as a road agent and his contributions that maybe fans wouldn't even put two and two together for?
Well, he was really good at it. I mean, he could place himself, because he had been there, into the wrestling boots of the participants. And I don't know that the goal when that match started was to turn Austin babyface, to be honest with you. But how the match was laid out led to that. So Jerry was phenomenal. And here's the other thing. When talking to the talents about a match, laying out the concept, the philosophy of this match, the talents trusted him. They knew that he wasn't after their spot. He didn't have a relative that wants their job, nothing. He was all for them to have a great performance. And between he and Pat Patterson, WWF, WWE had two really strong finish guys, and all because they both had success, they both had great experience, and so forth. And Jerry was just, he was trusted. People trusted Jerry, and he had great ideas. So he'd been a wrestling heel, he'd been a top baby face, he'd had success in tags, singles, whole 9 yards. So he was a viable asset. And when you go back and look at WrestleMania 13, that was a hell of a match. I thought that was a phenomenal, that match. It was as good as I've seen.
Yeah.
And I was glad I got to call it. Well, I think Vince and Lawler and I called it, I think.
That's right.
But you can see Pat and Jerry's fingerprints on it. So those two guys had two of the great architects in pro wrestling history, Steve and Bret, and Jerry. And I'm sure some by Pat, because Pat was very close to Bret, that Canadian thing, and which is fine. So it worked out really, really good. And Jerry never will get the credit that he deserves. He's always, and it should go mostly to the talents, but sometimes you got to look at the game plan, the coaching.
Yes, the coaching. That's the right phrase. You and I both being football fans, we know what we're talking about in that regard.
Yep.
I wanted to mention, his recruiting stuff has been legendary, and certainly you touched on it at the top where we talked about how he helped land the big fish that became Brock Lesnar, the next big thing, if you will. And we put together 2 and 2 that he helped put together some of the most iconic matches that we ever saw, including that WrestleMania Classic with Brett and Austin. But there were some other situations he had to handle. Also in 1997, Vader had his whole Kuwaiti situation where things didn't go exactly as we expected on a talk show, and Vader maybe went a little over the top, and as a result, found himself.
Conrad, he did go over the top. Leon, trying to be the great heel that he wanted to be, took it too far, and Jerry was the lead agent on that tour.
I want to mention these days you can hear some phenomenal stories from Mr. Brisco. He hooks up with Mr. Layfield every week, and they have a tremendous time together telling old stories. I can't recommend it enough. Go check it out anywhere you enjoy. Well, I like to watch the clips on social media, but I know they've got a YouTube channel, and they're also got an actual podcast now. Check it out. It's JC Layfield on Twitter, or of course, FJ Brisco on Twitter. But recently they discussed some details that hadn't previously been reported about that whole Vader situation, where Jerry was trying to get the United States Special Forces involved to help Vader escape the country by a cargo container. So that would get him from Kuwait to France, and then he could fly home. Because as the story goes, Vader was so big they didn't think they could hide him another way. So if we just ship him like cargo to another country, then he can come home. What a crazy story that is, right?
Yeah. Can you imagine putting a human being in a cargo box, flying him from country to country?
No,
I can't. No, it's not feasible. And I don't know that Leon would have gone for that either, quite frankly. Leon White, aka Vader. It's a funny story as hell. What Jerry was trying to do, Jerry was loyal to the talent on the tour. He was responsible for that talent on the tour. He was trying to get Leon home, bottom line. And the way it was done through the right channels and all that stuff, we didn't want to, the one thing he didn't want to do is destroy the bridge going back to that territory.
Of course.
There was money there.
Absolutely.
Money for everybody. So, it's a funny story though. I can just see Leon in a box. What do you put a bucket in there for him to do his business?
It's unbelievable.
Portable bathroom. I'm not going. So I'll take my chance. They're going to let me out of here sooner than later. And I'm not going to take a crate to France. Can you imagine getting in France and they open a crate and there's Leon?
No.
It's like Abdullah in the box or whatever in WCW back in the day and other places, coming out of a box. So it's a funny story though. And I'm sure that what Jerry was trying to do is anything he could think of to get Leon out of that country and get him home. That was a daily conversation I had. Me and Jerry talk every day on that deal. How's Leon? So it was, I'll say this, it wasn't funny at the time, but in hindsight, you could write a hell of a movie scene using that concept, that pretense of Leon in a box. It's just so funny, but it's not funny. It wasn't funny to Leon. And Jerry took it personally. So he wanted to take care of his guys, get them home.
Well, Jerry's called on a lot of different tasks. He's wearing a lot of different hats, if you will, for Vince McMahon, including during the Montreal screw job. There's a pretty famous story that Jerry Brisco was trying to teach Shawn Michaels how to protect himself in case Bret Hart tried to shoot on him. And of course, in 1998, I guess Art started to imitate real life. He became the on-air second for Vince McMahon. And of course, he, along with Pat Patterson, were lovingly known as the Stooges. How did that come about, and why were they so entertaining together? I guess you probably knew that long before we did. You saw it in real life, right?
Well, the thing about that is that Patterson and Briscoe had great chemistry long before they became the Stooges. They rode together. They hung out together. If Pat had a match that he was laying out for talents, he would oftentimes confide in Jerry and vice versa. So they had a good chemistry, good, a good relationship. But Vince Vince essentially, I said this before and I mean it. Vince was the top heel in the Attitude Era in WWE. There was no heel we had that had more heat on them than Vince McMahon. Mr. Jerry Brisco would say, Mr. McMahon. So Mr. McMahon and McMahon was he needed some backup, and he needed some. I don't want to necessarily say he needed what's that word that we use too much? Heater.
Yeah.
They were the heaters. Well, I guess they were technically, but they needed, quite frankly, Vince needed somebody to take some bumps for him so he could escape at times. So when Patterson and Briscoe were being bounced around like rubber balls in the ring, Vince could make his exit. That happened a lot. And so it also gave creative 2 more characters affiliated closely with the top heel that they could utilize. So that's quite how that all came about. It was a TV character thing. They didn't make house shows, or they did. It was very, very seldom. But they were great TV characters. And I thought the Stooges were probably one of the great creative things that we had in that Attitude Era. They just were really good. They had a lot of heat, and they were entertaining. When you match some matches and stuff, I always love the fact, hey, Pat, tonight you got to wear a dress.
The evening gown match, King of the Ring 2000, Jerry versus Pat.
Yeah. So, but both those guys had great psychology. They could take bumps still at that age and liked it. It made them feel young. And they were just really, really good at what they did. So I have a lot of gratitude to how well the Stooges did. They helped us sell a lot of tickets, and people love to see them get their ass whipped. That's the mark of a great heel. My chair is still squeaking, Conrad. I forgot to
WD-40 that motherfucker.
I'm going to WD-40 the holy hell out of this thing. I'll give you get some WD-40. Anyway.
By the way, that's the way, if you're just listening and you're never watching video, you can tell if Jim is in Oklahoma or Florida. If he's in Oklahoma, squeak, squeak.
Yeah. I'm sorry, folks. So please don't send a lot of tweets. I couldn't stand, oh my God, it ruined my day. And, I couldn't believe the chair was squeaking, and I just couldn't handle it. That's what somebody wrote the other day, said, you ruined AEW for me, JR, because you called Paul White Big Show. It just took me out of the game. And I want to say, buddy, are you shitting me?
Yeah.
Really? So anyway, I digress. But they were key components to the Stooges were key components. And I don't know, that's one of the better kept secrets of who was playing what and who knew what and all these things. But I'm positive that Vince confided in Patterson and Briscoe on that Montreal business. I'm positive that he made them aware of what he was going to do, obviously. And of course, they knew, without saying, that, you got to protect home base here. So, but the story of Jerry giving self-defense lessons to Shawn Michaels, I find a little far-fetched. It sounds good. Or if it was done in a dressing room or locker room, and if he does this or that, well, what are you going to teach somebody on the spot?
Right.
So I don't think that one has a lot of validity to it, that he was teaching Shawn how to shoot, so to speak. Don't make sense to me.
I want to mention the Real American. We would see Jerry and Pat come to the ring using Hulk Hogan's old Real American song by Rick Derringer. What a fabulous idea. Do you remember who gets credit for that? Because that's a home run.
I don't. It may have been Vince.
It's hilarious. It's just
it is
unbelievable.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I've said this before, that I don't need as a broadcaster to know all the infinite details.
Right.
So when they came out with that music, I didn't know they were going to do it.
It's tremendous.
So you got a natural reaction from me and Lawler, that's for sure. But it was entertaining as hell. They were entertaining characters. They were as entertaining as anybody on the roster, Patterson and Briscoe. And they got over. And, some of the promos that they did backstage in Vince's office were funnier than hell. And remember, that was before everything was scripted so heavily. It was a lot of ad lib between Pat and Jerry and interacting with Vince. So that's how skilled they were. So we oftentimes forget that. But some of the more entertaining things that happened on television, especially on Monday Night Raw during the Attitude Era, was stimulated by Jerry Briscoe and Pat Patterson.
Let's mention too, Jerry has personally recruited guys like Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, most of the amateur college wrestlers who came on. He was on their radar, or they were on his radar rather. Do you remember any other names that we should really specifically highlight that Jerry would have been involved in the recruiting of? Probably from like that, I don't know, we'll say the Attitude and the on into the Ruthless Aggression era, 95 to 02, because you guys were on quite a tear there.
Yeah, he did a great job. I would say this, because I'll leave names out that would probably be unfortunate. Anybody that came from amateur wrestling,
right?
Anybody, all Jerry Briscoe. And that's why he was going to all those tournaments and traveling and being willing to go travel and and he would go out to dinner with these coaches, or he'd have these little hospitality things with them. He created a positive bridge between the amateur wrestling world and WWE. And that's all Jerry. He was loyal. He had the same traits with those guys he did with me. He was reliable. He was loyal, and he understood the coaches had issues that they had to deal with. So he was cooperative. Hence, we could sign Brock Lesnar after his junior year of college. He'd have been there. And I didn't tell Vince that, because I know after Vince saw some clips of him, he was going to want to just bring him in now. And it just, we made our deal. And if Jerry had gone back on his deal, he would have ruined his whole relationship with the amateur wrestling world. He'd become a liar. Can't trust those damn pro wrestling people. And we weren't going to have that. So we did exactly as we promised. We made our deal, and consequently, we signed Brock within a couple of days after he had his last match, which was a national championship.
I want to mention he eventually gets his day in the sun. He goes in the Hall of Fame, 2008. It's the same show where you would induct Gordon Soley, and Jerry asked JBL to induct him. This had to be a big day in Mr. Briscoe's life, to know that all of his contributions in front of the camera and behind the camera are being acknowledged in his real home in wrestling, the WWE.
Yeah, it was great. I used to bust his balls about getting a Texan to. I said, all these issues you and your brother had with the Funks in the state of Texas, of course, all tongue in cheek here, and then you get a Texan to induct you. What the hell is wrong with you? You had too many tear shots or something. But they became buddies. They were friends, and it was good. Jerry helped bring Jerry Briscoe helped bring JBL into the company. I would sign off on all the deals.
Right.
I would review what we knew about this individual, or look at clips and things of that nature. But Jerry was out there looking too, and so and it was a good hire. JBL became a WWE champion, and is JBL in the Hall of Fame yet? I don't know that.
Yeah, I think he's in.
I think he should be in. If he isn't, I think he's in, but he should be in, quite frankly.
I think he just went in like last year or year before.
It's been recent. It's recent.
2020. Yeah. COVID year. That checked out.
COVID. Everything's COVID.
Well, if you remember, they didn't do the regular Hall of Fame last year. They just did like a double shot this year. So they did 2020 and 2021 this year, which is why it ran together for us.
I got you. So, but Jerry, Jerry had the ability on the guys he recruited to make lasting relationships.
Yeah.
So therefore, you get a young kid out of college or a new guy in the territory that had been in another company and whatever. Jerry was always there to help guide their way. And because he was a wrestler and a shooter, had a great pro career and had been with WWE forever. He knew where all the risky spots along the way were. And he is invaluable in that regard. And I think that's why he kept up with JBL. JBL envisioned himself being another Dick Murdoch. I remember telling John one time, I said, if I wanted to hire Dick Murdoch, I'd hire Dick Murdoch. And we eventually did hire Dick Murdoch. I said, but I saw different stuff in John. John could become, and that last incarnation of JBL as the champion, I thought was just phenomenal. I thought he did excellent. He was a really good heel. John Layfield is an easy guy to dislike what he wants to be. So in other words, he's much like I compared to Paul Heyman. You're easy to hate. And JBL was just a very natural heel.
Right.
And did a great job. So that's how that kind of worked out. But I did bust Jerry balls about the inductee, and then Jack he'd kind of that sleepish grin, well, Gerald's awful loyal. Yeah. I said, you guys made a big mistake. But I was kidding. It was perfect. JBL did a great job.
Of course, unfortunately, Jerry had some health issues in 2009. He's going to come off the road, but it's been said that you were a pretty major factor in bringing him back to work effectively as a talent scout for NXT in March of 2010. Do I have that right?
Yeah. You can't find people like him with his skill set and his reliability, his vision. He had a great knack for spotting people. I think that kid, one of the recent ones, I think Jerry recruited and signed for them. I was gone. What's that big kid's name? Otis?
Yeah, Otis. Yeah.
He was an amateur. He was one of Briscoe's boys. So if you peel back the onion a little bit on a lot of those guys from that have been in NXT and now in the other rosters, you'll find Jerry's name beside it. That's how they got there. So he was really good, and he didn't go on look. He went on feel, and everybody can't look like Randy Orton. Otis don't look like Randy Orton, by the way. Otis looks more like me and you, a guy you'd meet at the diner and sit down at the stool and order a chicken fried, But Jerry was just invaluable in that area. I thought he's too valuable not to use. And what he did, what I wanted him to do, was connect WWE with the amateur wrestling world. We need great athletes. We got a lot of those guys that they're just a different breed of cat, Conrad. They're just a different breed. They've been in an individual sport all their life as an amateur wrestler. So he could communicate with those dudes, make them feel comfortable, because they're not used to being on their back. And if you're in pro wrestling, one thing you got to learn to do is take a flat back bump and be comfortable being on your back from time to time. And Jerry could soothe all those issues.
So I wanted to mention a couple more things. One, I guess the rumor and innuendo that when you guys brought in Tracy Smothers in the mid 1990s and repackaged him as Freddie Joe Floyd, allegedly that's a wink and a nod in Mr. Briscoe's direction.
Oh yeah, it was a wink and a nod. Yeah, Freddie Joe Floyd. Jack's name is Freddie. His name Freddie. His legal name was Freddie. Nobody ever called him that. I don't know if anybody knew that. He was just always Jack.
Right.
And of course, that was I don't want to say, I think it started out as kind of a rib. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a tribute, to the Briscoes. And I enjoyed it, because those guys they were being repackaged, and Vince wanted some, repackage some guys. TL Hopper, Tony Anthony was a really underrated guy that we brought in at the same time. But there was somebody who did they give a name for Jerry? Maybe that was it, the Floyd thing.
Yeah, I thought it was Tracy Smothers, Freddie Joe Floyd.
I think that's it. I think you're right. But it was I never saw that as a negative or make fun of the Briscoes. I just thought it fit. And it was nice to have. I know Jerry wasn't offended by it, and nor should he have been.
I know you've probably heard the famous story of when Briscoe turned 60, Eric Bischoff finally thought he could take him.
Uh-oh.
They were in some hotel and he challenged him to a grappling match, and I don't think Eric got his hand raised at the end of that one.
I doubt it. Jerry could still go.
Yeah.
He would always rely back Conrad on his amateur background. He'd take your ass down. And I think that's what he did to Eric. I didn't see it. I remember it. And it made a lot of talent happy that old Jerry Brisco took the self-confident Eric Bischoff to task and got him on his back. So, hey, hats off to Eric.
Yeah.
He even did it. Hell, I wouldn't do it. Hey, I'm doing an angle one time in TV. Some fans may remember this, where I was doing interviews, and I interviewed Bob Backlund, who was going crazy, in the character. And so he got me in the cross-face chicken wing and was going crazy. And it was more stiff than I thought it should have been, but nonetheless, it was what it was. And Bobby's such a wonderful guy. What are you going to say? His adrenaline was flowing. So I do the deal. The agents all come out and referees, they pull him off of me, et cetera, et cetera. This is on Superstars, I think. And so I walked back through the curtain thinking, well, I've done my job for tonight. And the goddamn Briscoe schoolboyed me right on the concrete. Boom, took me down. I had no idea he was going to do it. He did it for the fun of it. So I walked back through, and I think I told him somewhere along the way, we're talking about finishes. That schoolboy finish is shits. Fans aren't buying it. It don't look good. It's not real looking. And boy, was I wrong. So I walked back to the gorilla position, and there's old Jerry. He was standing up. I didn't know what he was standing up for. Maybe he was going to give me a standing ovation. No, but he schoolboyed me. My head hit the concrete. My shoulders were on the ground, and I was beat again. And we laughed about that for years. The schoolboy that nobody saw. But that's the kind of personality he had. Even though I was a great friend, he was just having fun. And let me tell you this. And at the end of the day, the bottom line, as an old friend of mine used to say, the schoolboy works. The schoolboy's viable. It's real. Trust me on that one.
Let's also mention some other wrestlers. We said that if you came through the amateur wrestling circuit, then you're probably on his radar. Well, Brock Lesnar, Shelton Benjamin, Jason Jordan, Chad Gable, so many others are all going to go ahead and get the check mark by Jerry Briscoe's name.
Yep.
Of course, he became a hardcore champion as well, and lots of other little silly accomplishments in the WWE that got him on TV. But when it came down to fans really paying their respects, he went into the Lou Thez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2005, WWE's Hall of Fame in 2008, the Florida chapter of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2018. But unfortunately, last year, 2020, after 36 years with the company, Mr. Briscoe was let go by WWE. 36 years, though. Hell of a run, was it not?
That's what I'd rather look at it as, Conrad. 36 years of one company in the wrestling business is an amazing accomplishment. It is unbelievable. You're absolutely correct. But it was just sad to see him go, because I felt like that based on what we had, the role that we had created with Jerry, for Jerry, he could have still done that job. And I think that sometimes, all the politics of creating the NXT brand and who's in charge and who this, and, we know they're undergoing some change now and so forth and so on. So the politics roar on. But Jerry could have still fulfilled a great role. And I think that he still does, to kind of unofficially. Some coach, see, here's the deal, Conrad. Coaches now believe that Jerry's their guy.
Right.
And so when they got a kid that they believe has the aptitude and the motivation to be a pro wrestler,
They call Jerry.
Yeah. They still call Jerry. And then Jerry then will, turn the lead over to somebody else or hook up somebody on a phone call. At the time, it might have been when he was there, Canyon Seaman. whomever it may be, Jerry was still contributing and helping out the WWE because he was loyal for all those years of earning a paycheck, all those 36 years, and the money that he earned and so forth. He was still loyal. And that's why we've talked about him a lot today, is the fact that he was just so loyal, and he had this wonderful eye for talent. Goodness gracious. He was a great eye for talent. Best I ever saw. So, and again, he was very responsible for the success that WWE had right after we turned publicly traded company. We needed new faces, new talents. We needed to create our own stars, and Jerry was there on the spot to make sure we got that done.
Let's do a couple questions, then we'll wrap this one up. Bill Dozer Mania says, Jim, what's your best chocolate cake story with old Jerry? I've always heard he was a big fan.
Jerry and I had that in common as well. That's why we like to ride with each other from time to time. I remember the poor bastard, he drove everywhere. He wouldn't let me drive, which probably really showed how smart he really was. My night vision is not so cool. But we drove from Philadelphia to Hershey, I think it was. And I was going to do the big promo I did in the ring, turning heel.
Yep, 96.
And Jerry had to listen to that promo for like, I don't know, 2 hours, however long the drive was. But I thought I had it. No, just do it again. He was coaching me. He was getting me ready for TV the next day and Raw. And I was going to do this big sensationalistic promo. But I learned a lot. I absorbed it, and there might have been some chocolate cake involved in that drive, quite frankly.
Never hurt nobody.
I always thought that, we were very leery of smoking the flower, the green, or i.e. smoking a joint. If the vape thing had been then, we've been burning up those damn vape pens.
Y'all would have had stock in them, some bitches.
We might have invented something. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, but we didn't do it every day or nothing. But that was our booze. That was our drink of choice, was a little chill out a little bit. Jerry has a very weak stomach. Oh yeah. And I remember we were in upstate New York, maybe Albany. So we do TV. There's only one place open that we could find, Denny's. We go to Denny's and eat, have a little food there at Denny's. And so Jerry had to go to the bathroom. And so I went ahead and went to the car and started the car because it was colder than hell. But during the course of sitting in the car waiting on him, I needed to pass a little gas. And it was brutal. I mean, I'll admit, I was ashamed of myself. Oh man, I farted like a government needle, man. So when he got in the car, it was horrific. So he got a big, and then he started vomiting. So he had to swing the door up real quick and lean his head out the door and hurl everything he'd just eaten at Denny's because he smelt my fart. And I didn't realize just exactly how weak a stomach he had, but it was very weak. And the guys found out about it. And so then, if anybody had to fart, they'd fart at the gorilla position where he was working and then leave it. Vince did that one time, tried so hard to fart that he had little
short.
That's what you call shart, right?
Yeah, short.
So, and it kind of backfired because Vince, they played his music. It's live. It's a Monday Night Raw live.
Yeah, he's on TV with a load in his pants.
Oh yeah. Thanks to him trying to rib Jerry. So Jerry always took it in good stead, good natured, and so forth. And I just love the guy. He's just such one of the boys, and he still is. God bless him. I think the world of it. I keep telling him, I said, all that long hair you got, because he let his hair grow and his beard kind of grow. I said, God damn, man, you look more like Tommy Lee Jones every day. So, but he's a cool dude. So that's how I would look at that deal with that question. I like this question. So
open up your Twitter and send him a happy birthday tweet this Sunday. It's at FG Brisco, at FG Brisco, like for Gerald. We are so glad to have him over at adfreeshows.com. He's doing something with us every week with his old pal Taylor Williamson, just answering old mailbag questions. And of course, he's got a phenomenal show that you can catch on Twitter or YouTube or anywhere you enjoy podcasts with Mr. Layfield. But what a fixture he's been in wrestling, what a life he's had in wrestling. And he's turning the big 7-5 this Sunday. So let's celebrate with him. And Jim, I know you sent him a care package, and I know it's got some stuff from jrsbbq.com, does it not?
It does. He'll get a care package on birthday. He'll be the first guy to call and say, man, I really appreciate this. You know, he's just a grateful, good human being. And again, our Oklahoma ties brought us together, and then our relationship that we built kept us together. And like I said, he's going to always be known in my eyes, in my heart, as one of the key motivators, one of the key movers in the success of the WWE post-public era. And WWE is very lucky to have him. And I'm very lucky, even luckier, to have him as my friend then, now, and forever, as the old logo says. But he's a great guy. So yeah, send him a tweet him on his birthday, which is Sunday, and he'll appreciate it. He'll be genuinely moved, and I'm sure a lot of you'll get responses. So he's just a sweetheart of a guy, and I can't think of anybody I would have rather been along this journey with more than Jerry Brisco. He's a special, special human being.
And we're looking forward to Sunday, the big 7-5. And this Sunday, I'm going to be firing up my grill on the back porch, Jim. I got that all-purpose seasoning handy. I made some steaks this past Tuesday, and we had some folks over to eat dinner with us, and we broke out the all-purpose seasoning, and it works great on steak too. I'd been bragging about how often I used it on pork and on chicken, but I had some guys online say, "You don't use it on steak?" Of course I do. I use it on all my protein, but as I mentioned, the wife's even using it on the broccoli. And we had some guests, and they were asking about it, and they sort of thought, well, hey, I thought that was like a novelty thing that you bought something with JR's face on it and put it on the shelf. And Mrs. Thompson took over and said, oh no, and it's low in sodium, or else I couldn't use it. The seasoning that Conrad was using before was too high in sodium. I couldn't use it on mine. So his would get seasoned, mine would not. Now we can both use JR's all-purpose seasoning.
Correct.
And you can get a good deal right now at jrsbbq.com, right, Jim?
We've always got sales ongoing, and Stephen Link runs the site here in Norman. And yeah, it's just amazing how that popular that seasoning has kind of become our secret pal, I guess. It's just people are buying the hell out of it and finding ways to use it. You know, I told you before, my granddaughters use it on their popcorn. You know, I use it when I go out and I'll grill a little grilling pan, fried potatoes and onions.
Let my family save your family some cash. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need money out of your pocket, but we will save you money. It's not a matter if, it's a matter of how much. SaveWithConrad.com.
Because it's kind of an homage to my mom, because she loved to cook that and I love to eat it and made the house smell good and all that good stuff. So I use it on my fried potatoes and onions that I cook on the grill. So there's a lot of good uses for that. And of course, here in Oklahoma, the weather's so hot. I felt bad last week for Western Carolina because I don't think they were ready for the heat, and hence the 76-0 score. I don't know who that helped, quite frankly. I don't know who that helps for anybody. I don't think it helps Alabama to play Mercer. I don't think it helps Oklahoma to play Western Carolina, for example. I'm not picking on either school. It's just a money grab for the other school. They know they're coming there to do the job. They're job guys, and they're generally outmanned, especially this past weekend. Alabama could have beat Mercer as bad as they wanted to.
Yeah,
they could have. And I know OU was playing kids that weren't even on the roster. They give you a little thing, you know, for our suite, the depth chart and all the roster. There were guys that I had to go find on the roster. Who's that guy? They played everybody. Everybody got in the game. So anyway, I'm a big fan of that kind of the game itself, not those outcomes. So anyway, the JR's BBQ JRSBBQ.com. That's what it is, right? JRSBBQ. Pretty easy to remember. As I say, it costs nothing to look, baby.
I was about to ask, how much does it cost to look? But hey, we're hoping you're looking our way next week. We're going to be talking about Unforgiven 2001. What a show this was. Just to give you some context, we are 12 days after 9/11. We're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Kurt Angle's hometown. Kurt Angle's entire family, including his mother, are sitting front row ringside. And he's going to be challenging Stone Cold Steve Austin for the world title in the main event. We recently covered that on the Angle show. Kurt got emotional and compared this win to the night he won the Olympics. That's how important it was to him. And Jim and I are going to talk about the entire show next week here on the program. The undercard had Rhino and Tajiri for the United States Championship. The Rock and Booker T would be squaring off. And of course, Shane McMahon is there too, as Booker T's tag team partner, in a handicap match for the WCW title. Rob Van Dam will be taking on Chris Jericho for the hardcore title. We've got the Brothers of Destruction taking on Chronic for the WCW tag titles. Christian and Edge are going to hook it up for the Intercontinental Championship. And we've got a 4-way elimination match for the WWF tag team titles with the Dudley Boys, Big Show and Spike, the Hurricane and Lance Storm, and of course the Hardy Boys. 2001 is such a loaded roster year. Of course, on the heels of WCW and ECW going down, business is starting to go down a little bit, maybe plateau, but on the heels of a great American tragedy like we had at 9/11, and we're in Kurt Angle's hometown, and he is our Olympic hero. What a moment that was, and what a call you had that night. And we'll play some clips from that as well, because man, it was just full of emotion that night, was it not?
Yeah, it was. The roster was loaded. Guys were motivated. You're right. The after effects of 9/11 were still at front of mind awareness for all of us. It was a feel good moment, and it couldn't have happened at a better place, a better time. Because normally guys get beat in their hometown. You know, that's kind of the WWE way. You know, any time we went to Oklahoma City or Tulsa, I figured I was going to be the butt of a joke, or get beat up by somebody. And the guys that beat me, I think we ought to do a show sometime about all the guys that beat up JR and the backstory of getting into those deals. So it was cool. I was a little bit shocked that Kurt said it was as big as winning the Olympic gold medal to him personally. And I think because his family was all there and his friends, and, you know, God almighty, I don't know how many comps Kurt needed for that show, but it was a fair amount, let's say. But it was amazing. And it's nice to know that winning that championship meant that much to a guy that already won a gold medal. So it tells you how important Kurt perceived his job to be. So I'm looking forward to that show. It was a fun show to call. As you said, the talent roster was overflowing. And so everybody looked at a way to try to, you mentioned all these WCW people, WCW titles, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody was kind of uncertain where they were going to land. Are we going to do WCW? Or are we going to have another league, or, you know, what's going on? So it was a very unique time to be a wrestler in WWE. And we'll tell some of those stories next week. I think the folks are really going to like it.
Stay tuned, boys and girls. Lots of fun stuff coming your way, including Unforgiven next Thursday. But don't forget AEW this coming Wednesday. Of course, they've got a great show tomorrow night on TNT. We call it Rampage. But Dynamite next week. Man, we've had this one circled for a long time. Arthur Ashe Stadium. Don't miss it. JR is going to be on the call, and we'll be back the very next morning talking Unforgiven 2001 on Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross.
And I'm not embarrassed about my squeaky chair. So those of you who want to tweak can kiss my ass. How's that go? Pretty simple. Cut to the chase here. But I do need to, the WD-40 needs to come out. And I'm here so seldomly, I don't even know where the WD-40 might be. I got to go look for it. But I apologize if it ruined anybody's day. You poor little snowflakes. You poor little people.
Oh, my God.
Little millennials. Go back to your room and leave the Kleenex and the lotion alone.
Oh,
yeah. Just don't do it. Don't suffer and don't mourn. It's a squeak in a chair. That's all. That's all it is. Hey, look at this picture right here, Conrad. See that right over my right shoulder?
I do.
That's Danny Hodge on the cover of Sports Illustrated, April 1st, 1957. He built the frame. He made the frame. He gave me the cover, and he signed it.
How awesome is that?
You think I got the John Wayne's hairpiece there, and then Mickey Mantle jersey, a signed bats from the Mick and so forth. Some more John Wayne stuff. Nothing in my home means more to me than my boyhood hero making me a picture frame. And I just wonder someday when I'm not here, what'll happen to it. I'm going to have to sell it to you. I'll give it to you. You got room for it in your place?
I got room for whatever you're wanting to unload. I've been after you for a few things already, so just add that to the list.
Well, we'll talk about that sometime. I'm only buried with it, but nonetheless, it's kind of cool stuff. So, but I'll work on my squeaky chair. You know, folks, that the squeaky wheel gets greased. You know that, right? So it'll happen. It'll happen sometime, and maybe for next week's show, because I plan on being back here next week, so I can watch the OU Nebraska game at the stadium here in town on Saturday, 11 a.m. If you're checking it out, it's on Fox. They got their big crew coming. Coach Stoops is on the broadcast team now at Fox. My good friend Jacob Ullman is the head honcho, one of the head honchos of that organization, or as they say in Canada, organization. And so life is good, folks. And I really appreciate everybody joining us on the road. Those crowds on the road have been unbelievable. I can only imagine to attempt to visualize what that Arthur Ashe Stadium is going to look like. It's going to be, if you're a wrestling fan, I promise you, you're going to be proud of what we're delivering. And you're going to be excited and probably say, I wish I was there. You know, I think we got 17,000 tickets sold.
It's unbelievable. Biggest AEW show in history. Set your DVR. It's this coming Wednesday, Arthur Ashe Stadium. And then we'll be back next Thursday morning talking Unforgiven 2001. We'll see you next week, everybody.
See you guys. I got to grease this chair. I know. Just send me a dirty, nasty ass tweet.
No, let's not and say we did.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't listen to me. But thanks for listening. And we appreciate your business and your support. You know, Conrad, most of your shows are in the top 10 of podcasts worldwide.
Yeah, our buddy Cassio says all the time, you know, Conrad has 7 of the top 5, which kind of makes me laugh.
Cassio, good guy. So anyway, thanks for listening, folks. Conrad, thanks to you for doing it all. You're the coach. You're our big toe. You're my Sergeant Hulka. And I love you for it. My mom.
Love you too, man. Have fun at the game this weekend. We'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.